up, Victor?
What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another episode of WizKidsForever, episode 4. Before we get too deep into this episode, though, if you're checking this out on YouTube, be sure to comment, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe. On the road to 2,000 followers, and I can't do it without you guys' support. I got a lot of support from our draft recap episode, and I got a lot of subscribers from that episode as well. So you guys must have liked what your boy was talking about over here at WizKidsForever. And if you did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. As always, I appreciate all you guys' support. But without further ado, let's get into this episode. I'm going to give you a timestamp as I do for all of my episodes. Today is Monday, July 1st. And it's about 11 a.m. And we're about, 16 hours removed from the start of the legal tampering period, or the beginning of NBA free agency period, where teams can start to negotiate contracts. And there were a lot of moves. But I'll be remiss to not mention that 6 o'clock was a little bit anticlimactic. Because since the draft for the last 3 days and knowing what the NBA free agency and the type of fireworks that they can produce, it was a huge marketing ploy. It was a lot of hype around the NBA free agency period. And when 6 o'clock came around, it was rather anticlimactic, because while there were some moves that were made, there weren't a lot of impact moves that would necessarily change the landscape of the NBA. Don't get me wrong, there were definitely a few, but there weren't a lot of moves, and I think that there's more to come, or I know that there's more to come today and for the years, before the days on out, before we get into, the doldrum of the off season, the dog days of the summer, where everybody's out on vacation. But some of the moves that happened yesterday was that, Paul George informed the Clippers that he would not be re-signing with them, and then he ended up signing with the Philadelphia 76ers in the middle of the night. I think this morning we had Isaiah Hartenstein go to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Warriors and Klay Thompson will not be returning to the Warriors, so they will not be reuniting. So there were a couple of moves, and a couple of impactful moves, don't get me wrong, that have definitely helped change the landscape of the NBA. And the Wizards actually got up in that thing. Added to the list of movers and shakers and became active on day one of the free agency period by signing center Jonas Valanciunas, former Toronto Raptor, former Memphis Grizzly, former New Orleans Pelican center Jonas Valanciunas to a 3-year, $30 million deal. So that's how they commenced their free agency period. And while I was kind of surprised by the signing, while I was kind of not necessarily shocked by the signing, because it's going to take a lot for stuff that happened in the NBA to shock me. Just my history as a fan, we know the NBA free agency has a lot of twists and turns that can sometimes be unpredictable. And this signing was unpredictable, and that's the word that I would give it. But I am a huge advocate for this signing. No, I'm not in love with this signing. I'm not here to glaze this signing and make it something that is not. I'm not here to tell you that Jonas Valanciunas is going to have us competing for the 2025 NBA Finals. No, I'm not saying that. But this is a potential high reward, low risk signing that I'm an advocate for. And I'm going to give you some of the reasons that I'm an advocate for it now. This isn't going to be too long of an episode. So once again, thank you guys for tuning in to WizKidsForever. But one of the reasons, or one of the biggest reasons that I'm an advocate for the signing of Jonas Valanciunas is that it allows Alexander Sarr to play the 4. This is something that it was reported was his preference going into the draft. It was one of the reasons why it was reported that he didn't want to go to the Atlanta Hawks. Now, I didn't necessarily see any, tangible evidence or, reports saying that it was, quotes coming from him or things of that nature. But if that is the case and the power forward or the 4 is his destined or his preferred position to play in the NBA, then this signing makes a whole lot of sense. This signing makes a whole lot of sense, and I think that the Wizards are actually following a couple other teams' blueprints, a couple of teams that had to go through the rebuild that are now contenders and that are now successful in the 2024 NBA. And one of those was taking a page out of the Memphis Grizzlies playbook. One of those was taking the plays out of the Memphis Grizzlies playbook, and let me tell you what I mean by that. If you guys have been paying attention to the pre-draft process, the scouting reports and things of that nature, one of, the consensus comps for Alexander Sarr was Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr., right? Well, in Jaren Jackson Jr.'s case, when the, Memphis Grizzlies drafted him in 2018, a couple of weeks later, they brought in Jonas Valanciunas. They brought in Jonas Valanciunas, and the reason why is because he has the body, he has the physical profile, and he has the years in the league to be able to match up with a lot of these big burly centers like a Joel Embiid, like a Nikola Jokic. And while there aren't many burly centers in the NBA, you still need guys on your roster that are able to negate that when you do go up against that. And that's what the Grizzlies did in 2018 with Triple J, with Jaren Jackson Jr. Because it allowed him to peg over to the 4 where, his superpower, which is his rim protection and his weak side blocking ability, could be on full display. He can now help out on that 5 while still guarding and having the defensive gravity to not only guard the rim, but to guard the mid-range area, the three-point line, and things of that nature. When comparing him to Jaren Jackson Jr., as I mentioned before, if Alexander Sarr is going to want to play the 4, and if he's going to stick at the 4 in the NBA, which is something that I think he can do. I think he can do. When I was watching his scouting and things of that nature during the pre-draft process, y'all know he's my favorite prospect. I almost had a heart attack when we ended up with him because of the fact that I thought that he was the best player in this draft. But if he's going to be pegged at the 4 in the 2024 modern NBA, he's going to have to work on some things in his offensive bag. And I think that he does have the skill set and the capabilities to do it, but it has to be done. It has to be done. If we're comparing him to Jaren Jackson Jr., as I mentioned before, I think he comes into the league day one as a better ball handler than Jaren Jackson Jr. And I think that his shot creation is already better than Jaren Jackson Jr. But he's not the shooter that Jaren Jackson Jr. is, especially from 3. Now, when you're comparing them as prospects, I don't even think that Alexander Sarr is the type of shooter that Jaren Jackson was as a prospect coming from Michigan State. So if you're going to stick at that 4 spot to give us a Twin Towers type look, a modern 2024 Twin Towers type look, you're going to be able to, you have to be able to hit that jump shot. And as I told you before, I love Alexander Sarr's form. I love his touch on his jump shots, but the percentages to this point at this very moment just simply aren't there for him to be, consistently pegged at the 4 and to give you that NBA level spacing. Yeah, you can be the fucking Detroit Pistons of 2004 or the Spurs with David Robinson and Tim Duncan and not have much spacing, but that's not the way that you win in 2024 NBA. I'm sorry. It's not. It's not. So while I do see a lot of potential for Alexander Sarr at the 4 spot, because I'm telling you now, I have no worries about him on the defensive end. I have no questions about whether he'll be able to guard power forwards, whether he'll be able to guard forwards. Because guess what? In a lot of cases, even if you want to consider him a wing, I know Boston has Jason Tatum as a wing. And not necessarily, and that's not the best example, but these are big wing type players like a Pascal Siakam that play the 4 position. I don't think that Alexander Sarr is going to have a lateral quickness disadvantage against any of those guys. As I told you before, the way that he moves at 7'1", 225 pounds is freaky, especially laterally on the perimeter. So I understand why he sees himself as a 4 or see his skill set fit as a 4 because he can do a lot of damage on the perimeter, which allows, pairing a guy with Jonas Valanciunas with a guy like Alexander Sarr, that allows him to spend time in an NBA strength and conditioning program, getting some rocks in his ass, getting heavier, so that if he does have to play a 5 in a pinch, whenever, we want to use that as an advantage, he has the capability of doing it and just simply not getting pushed up under the rim like we've been seeing for the 28 years I've been watching Wizards basketball. And that's what I meant in my last episode when I said it pays to have a foundational big. No matter if they want to be the power forward or the center. Having a foundational big that can anchor your defense, that can set defensive principles, that can set defensive concepts is a win. And that's something that I think that Jonas Valanciunas can do. Not saying that he's prime Ben Wallace by any means. And matter of fact, towards the second half of the season, he looked like a damn matador on defense. But this is a guy that still is going into year 14, so he has the experience. He's seen everything that is possible to see in the NBA, and he can instill some of this wisdom and some of this knowledge into some of our young guys, especially at the big man position. Now, this signing, one of the reasons why it did confuse me is because it did leave us with a surplus of centers on the roster. When you think about Alexander Sarr being a big, when you think about Marvin Bagley, we declined Rashawn Holmes' option, but then we extended him to a 2-year, $25 million extension, kind of decreasing his cap hit for this year about $300,000, but extending a year onto his contract. So you think about he's on the roster as well. And then we declined Tristan Vucevic's option, which was reported by Hoops Hype on Saturday, I believe, which had me a little puzzled. Now, I do think that there's potential for us to potentially sign Tristan Vucevic to a long-term deal, which I would hope that we would do because he showed a lot of promise in his few games coming in towards the end of the season. So I would love for us to sign him to a longer-term contract. But if you guys ever pay attention to Shams, if you guys have ever paid attention to Woj, when they're dropping their tweets and things, they always let you know if there's a second tier or second leg move to that done to the move that they're recording on. They always let you know if that's a prerequisite move to another. And I didn't necessarily see that reported with Tristan Vucevic. They always hedge their words like, oh, the teams are still working to kind of the teams are still have mutual interest in each other and things of that nature. I didn't see any type of wording with that with the Tristan Vucevic report, which kind of concerns me, especially after this Jonas Valanciunas signing. While I do think that we do end up ultimately, re-signing Tristan Vucevic because I don't think that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins are the type of guys that he just throw an asset to the side like that without getting any value out of them or any return on investment or anything of that nature. It does leave a question as, like what are we doing with this roster? When you look at this roster and see 600 centers on this roster, it's like, and none of them necessarily have the floor spacing ability where you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So it does beg the question, like, what are we doing? Because as I mentioned, and if you aren't following us on social media, be sure to go ahead and follow us over there on X at WizKidsForever. But if you guys have been following my social media page, I'm a big advocate, and I think that the Alexander Sarr, especially if they view him as a 4, I think that the Alexander Sarr, Tristan Vucevic front court can be the front court of the future. It can be the front court of the future. And one of the reasons why I just mentioned that, Jonas Valanciunas can help, develop or allow Alexander Sarr to develop in a weight program while he's, giving him wisdom and things like that. I think he can be an even bigger beneficiary, or I think Tristan Vucevic can be an even bigger beneficiary to Jonas Valanciunas' presence. One of the reasons that I say that is that his game is more similar to a guy like Jonas Valanciunas, where it's not relying on, athleticism, where you got a guy like Alexander Sarr jumping with a damn 38-inch vert at 7'1", like he's prime Wilt Chamberlain or something. Tristan Vucevic's game is more relying on skill, more relying on pace. He doesn't necessarily crash the glass as hard as Jonas Valanciunas, but these are some things that he can learn from a guy like Jonas Valanciunas, and that's one thing that I wanted to mention as well. Bringing in the number one thing, if the end all be all, if everything else fails, the number one thing that the Jonas Valanciunas signing did is that it covered up your rebounding deficiencies that we've been having for 35 years. The Wizards haven't been a top rebounding team since Nene and Gortat. And those years were few and far between the years before that, to be honest. So this is a guy that helps cover up your rebounding deficiency, and he can also help those young bigs that I mentioned, like an Alexander Sarr and a Tristan Vucevic, if he's re-signed, to become better rebounders and things of that nature. If you guys go back to my last video where I was talking about Alexander Sarr, one of the few weaknesses that I saw in his game is that he didn't necessarily crash the boards for somebody with a 7'1", 225-pound frame with a damn near 40-inch vert. He should be getting 15 rebounds a game, and that just simply was not the case. But when you're pairing him with a veteran center, somebody that has experience with being one of the league leaders in rebounding and being one of the best rebounders in the league throughout his entire career, since he stepped foot in the NBA, Jonas Valanciunas has been one of the league's best rebounders. This is a guy that can help be a beneficiary to that aspect of Alexander Sarr's game as well. So I definitely hope that we do re-sign Tristan Vucevic, because as I just mentioned, I think that him and Alexander Sarr can definitely be the front court of the future. And no, I'm not buying or holding too much stock in a second round pick. But I think that, some of the things that he showed in his few games towards the end of the season showed me that he's every bit of an NBA player. And I think that his skill set along with Alexander Sarr's skill sets match up ideally as well, especially if they view Alexander Sarr as a 4. With some of those, defensive limitations that Tristan Vucevic might present, Alexander Sarr can be able to cover that up, and vice versa for the offensive end as well. So I hope we re-sign Vooch because I think that, he can contribute, and he'll be a contributor to a contending team whenever that may be for the Washington Wizards. And I think that his interior passing game can unlock Sarr as well. And one thing, and honestly, this was probably the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the reported signing, was like, woo, we got another Wizards killer off of our backs. We don't have another Wizards killer. That's a less ops that we have to worry about. If you guys can think of the likes of Mo Peterson, Jonas Valanciunas, whatever, Monte Ellis, whatever Wizards killer that you want to name, Jonas Valanciunas has low-key been a Wizards killer. And if you can look, some of his best career games have been against the Wizards. I think that he had a 20-20 game against us. If it wasn't last season, it was the season before that. And one of the reasons that is because we haven't had a foundational big. Stop telling me about Daniel Gafford. That's what y'all wanted to do in my last episode. I meant to say that we drafted and developed. So that was where I misspoke. We haven't had a foundational big that we drafted and developed since Brendan Haywood. But y'all were over here overhyping Daniel Gafford. Yeah, Daniel Gafford had a cool little finals run playing with two of the best guards in NBA history that are going to feed him the ball at the damn rim. I get it. I'm not taking anything away from Daniel Gafford. But do y'all have amnesia? Do y'all not remember that anytime that Daniel Gafford went against a center that weighed more than 240 pounds, he was getting his ass pushed under the rim like a toddler? Are we forgetting that? Are we forgetting that? And Jonas Valanciunas was one of those guys. Because guess what? That 2020 game that he had a couple years ago came against Daniel Gafford. Came against y'all boy Daniel Gafford. We got to stop overrating these players. We got to stop overrating these players. But getting back to the signing, as I mentioned before, high risk, low reward. Outside of, the things that I mentioned already, my favorite thing about this, this signing is that the contract can easily be moved. So let's say that, Jonas comes out and has a reclamation year, a bounce back year, because as I mentioned, towards the second half of the year, he was seeing less and less minutes with the New Orleans Pelicans. Let's say that he has a bounce back year, and come the trade deadline, there's contenders looking for a rebounding piece that's going to take him over the top. Well, guess what? The Wizards have your guy. And I honestly think that we ultimately ended up helping the Lakers, but the rest of the NBA does that all the time. Why does that matter? And the reason that I say that is because everybody in LA talks about how Anthony Davis needs to be paired with a bigger body to allow him to compete. Kind of like some of the things that I was talking about with Alexander Sarr, free roaming on the defensive end, being a rim protector and things like that. Everybody's talked about how since Dwight Howard left, the Lakers need a solidified big man, a solidified five to let Anthony Davis do his things at the four. Well, guess what? If that's still the case in February, well, guess what? The Wizards have a big man for you at just the low price of $10 million. Jonas Valanciunas is going to be making less than Rashawn Holmes last year. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. It don't really make sense to me, but it shows me that Will Dawkins and Michael Winger are in that thing cooking. They in the kitchen cooking with hot grease. And I say that to say that I don't think that the moves stop here. Because as I mentioned, the roster looks a little wonky right now. The roster does look a bit wonky right now. When you look at it and see 600 centers on this joint, you got to question, like, what is going on? What are we doing here? What is going on, right? But I think that, when your roster's in such a transient state, in such a flexible state where you can get in and out of assets, you can accumulate assets, you can take on other teams' bad contracts, I think that there's something up Will Dawkins' sleeve right now. I think that there's something that's up Will Dawkins' sleeve. And if you look at, like, the potential of a Tyus Jones signing trade with a home salary and things of that nature, I don't know if it's a guy like Zach LaVine, who has one of the worst contracts, who has the worst contract in the NBA. No. Bradley Beal has the worst contract in the NBA. Zach LaVine, who has the second worst contract in the NBA, and it's been reported that the Chicago Bulls are looking to attach first round picks to his contract to just simply get off of it. Hey, the Wizards can do that. We are in the state of the rebuild where we're able to do that, and this would not feel like bringing in 2017, 2018 Zach LaVine in the middle of his prime. But guess what? That don't matter. We ain't looking to win anyway. So if Zach LaVine can come in and help contribute to the tank while sitting on that bad contract, but we get 2 first round picks out of it, sign me up for that shit. Inject that shit in my veins. We can put him in the human tank job, Johnny Davis out there. I promise you we won't win more than 6 games. I promise you that. That's my nickname for Johnny Davis, the human tank job. So I expect him to see a lot of minutes this year in hopes of capturing the flag. But enough about the 2025. Let's stay in the present. Let's stay where our feet are. But yeah, I don't really have much more to say. You guys can see that I'm a clear advocate of this signing. It allows you to, have veterans or have a veteran presence with a young roster. So with that being said, I don't know if, Kuzma's services are as needed as much. I don't know if Tyus Jones' services are needed as much. And as I mentioned before, I think that, the front office kind of bit off more than they can chew, holding firm and trying to get a first-round pick out of Tyus Jones. I think that they learned their lesson with that, and they're hoping that they can get something out of him with a signing trade, but I don't think they'll make that same, one of the few mistakes that they've made so far, I don't think they'll make that same mistake with a guy like Jonas Valanciunas. While I don't expect him to stay with us for the duration of this 3-year, $30 million deal, as I said, this contract is easy malleable and can easily be moved, where you're bringing him in hopes of accumulating or using him to help you accumulate other assets down the lines, which was the hope when we brought in Tyus Jones last year. We were hoping that we would get other assets. It just simply didn't work out like that, but you can still get something with a Tyus Jones signing trade. So do the Bulls need a point guard? I know they brought in Josh Giddey. But there's something. I smell it. There's something cooking over there in the front offices over there at Capital One Arena, wherever the hell they reside during the off season. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode of WizKidsForever. If you like this episode, be sure to tell me. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're not following us on social medias, I'm going to always reference my social media pages on here because I love chopping it up with you guys and I love chopping it up with the community over there. So if you're not following me on X or Twitter, because we still call it by his biological daddy, You can follow us at WizKidsForever. The same handle on Instagram at WizKidsForever. If you're checking this out on audio-only platforms such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a ranking, please leave a review. That's the only way that we finesse these algorithms so that when you're searching anything Washington Wizards, WizKidsForever is your number one content hub, and you're making sure that you get whatever you need from us, because you know you come to us for the most raw, uncut, and unfiltered analysis on the Washington Wizards. And last but not least, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? What are you doing? Be sure to comment, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, because I genuinely do love chopping it up with all you guys. And I love doing this, and it's a passion of mine. So hopefully you guys see that. You guys enjoyed the channel, and keep checking in for the channel for a lot more content. I'm about to go on vacation, so I'm about to push out as much content as I can. But that'll do it for this episode of WizKidsForever. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know how you feel about the Jonas Valanciunas signings. Let me know what you think we're going to be doing for the rest of the free agency period. Thank you, guys.